Yeah, now live chat.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the South Oxfordshire and Vale of Whitehorse District Council's Joint Audit and Governance Committee. I'm Councillor Smith from Vale and I'll be chairing this meeting. The meeting's being held in Abbey House in Abingdon, and members are here in person as required for voting, but officers and public speakers are able to join remotely if they wish. The meeting is being live streamed and recorded on the Council's YouTube channel for public viewing. There's two procedural matters. For those joining remotely, when not speaking, can I ask you to keep muted and your camera off, as you all are at the moment? Thank you. And if you share a presentation on the screen, if you could stop sharing it as soon as possible, as soon as it's not needed anymore. And then if councillors in the room wish to ask a question or participate in the debate, you can please raise your hand and I will do my best to spot your hand and maybe ask Moppy to help me with that if I miss anybody. Housekeeping announcements, the evacuation procedure first of all. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate the building by the nearest exit, which is in the corridor immediately to the right of this meeting room, and wait at assembly point 9 in the area outside the area beyond the fire exit. And we will follow Darius if that happens. On arriving at this meeting, you should have read the emergency evacuation procedure and signed the fire register. If you haven't done that, if you let Darius know. Can I remind everyone to switch their mobile phones off at this point, or switch the sound off on your laptops and things throughout the meeting? That would be great. And when the meeting's ended, I'll ask for confirmation the live stream has ended, and at that point you can leave the virtual meeting. And if you're in the building and when you leave, please can you remember to sign out on the fire register. So I will move on to the agenda then. So the first agenda item is, did you need to do a roll call or just apologies for absence?
Just apologies, Chair. Okay. So the only apology we received is from the independent member, Mike Boone.
Thank you. All house from both councils, which is good. The next item is the minutes from our last meeting, which was on the 30th of October. So I'm going to ask Simon in a moment to just give us an update on the audit progress. But can I just first ask, is everybody happy that those minutes are a true account of the meeting, and are we happy to approve them?
Yeah, have a propose.
Yeah. Okay. So
propose.
Yeah, Councillor Khan proposed, Councillor Morgan to second, and then everybody happy to accept those minutes as an accurate record.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And then, yeah, I just thought this was a good point in the agenda to quickly ask Simon to give us an update on the audit progress.
Okay.
And sign off.
So thank you. So as you'll be aware, when the accounts came in October, they were close to being finished, signed off for audit, but weren't actually signed off at the meeting. They were finally signed off in the middle of December, so they're now published and complete, which is good news. Actually, there's there's a lot of councils who haven't got a 21-22 set of accounts signed off yet. We reported previously plans to deal with the backlog of audit. We finally had an announcement ahead of a consultation that is due, which is likely to suggest that all audits up to and including 22-23 must be completed by the end of September of this year. We haven't seen the consultation yet, or I certainly haven't seen the consultation yet. So we, EY, aren't coming here tonight because they've got nothing on the agenda, but they've advised me that they will be in touch, well, EY will be in touch with all their clients to explain their plan, if that is the government's plan, for what will happen with the audit 22-23 account.
Excuse me, so just out of interest, I mean, if we just think about that, what the government are asking, given what you said, that many people haven't even got 21-22 home yet, the idea of getting that and 22-23 home by September with the audit resource that's out there, looks like the immovable force and the irresistible object.
Well, what it will end up with is
force and immovable object.
Is a number of councils will see their accounts disclaimed, so the auditor won't give an opinion on them. So obviously normally we get an opinion, it's either qualified or unqualified. If they disclaim, then they're not actually giving an opinion, or they're disclaiming responsibility for issues in the accounts. 22-23 is the last year we're due to be audited by EY. 23-24 we start being audited by Bishop Fleming, who we've already started discussions with. Now, clearly, from Bishop Fleming's perspective, if the 22-23 accounts are audited and signed off, then they're in a good place to start 23-24.
Yeah.
The issue for us would be, as it would be for all if the accounts are disclaimed to be an issue for all councils, is how do you prove the opening balances if they're being audited? And I think that's one of the questions that's got to be wrestled with, in terms of dealing with this. And it's very tricky. But I think we'd all agree that, if we're sat here on the 30th of March, 30th of January, even, 2024, celebrating the fact that a set of accounts dated the 31st of March 22 has just been signed off, and that's a good thing, then the situation is clearly broken, isn't it? That's the challenge.
Yeah, thank you for that update, Simon, and I'm sure we will discuss the progress and the timeframes at a future meeting as well. And yeah, thank you for your work and your team's work getting the audits ready to be signed off. And obviously we discussed them in the last meeting, but there was a bit of to and fro in between as well, just to make sure we were happy to sign over. So yeah, thank you for all of that. Can I move on to declarations of interest? Does anybody have anything to declare at this point? Not aware of any, but obviously if anything crops up in the meeting, just indicate and we can make a note of it at the time. I don't have any other urgent business. The only thing that me and Simon discussed putting under that item we've covered under the minutes. And then we move on to public participation, and we don't have anybody registered to speak from the public. So therefore we're up to item 6, which is the internal audit update report, and for quarter 3. So can I hand over to Victoria to introduce that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have our usual quarterly update on internal audit work. So we're looking at quarter 3 this time. In terms of the 22-23 plan, we now have all of the audits completed, so that's really good news. And in terms of the 23-24 plan, we're making good progress, and we're on track at the moment with the audit work. So again, very positive. In September, October, we reviewed the contents of the plan and made a few updates. Explanations of the changes that we made can be found in Appendix 2. And this review was done in consultation with both Simon, Head of Finance, and SMT. In this quarter, we issued one limited assurance report, and that is the grounds and parks maintenance review. The auditor who did the work is John Cladria, and he is joining on Teams this evening. So I'll hand over to John to run through that report, if I may. Thank you, John.
No problem. Thank you, Victoria. Good evening, everyone. Internal Audit completed its review of grounds and parks maintenance in October 2023 and reported an overall assurance rating of limited, with 18 joint recommendations agreed by the action owners, including 4 priority 1, 10 priority 2 and 4 priority 3. Detailed findings and management responses can be found in Appendix 3 from page 19 of your agenda pack. The report incorporates a review of 3 service areas: grounds maintenance, parks and trees, with findings specific to those service areas identified by a tick to the right-hand side of the key findings page. The Technical Services Manager, John Backley, is present to provide an update on actions relating to the review. Alternatively, I am happy to answer any questions on the audit report itself. Thank you.
John, John Backley, did you want to provide an update on your actions? Oh, you're on mute, John, I think. We can see you.
Yeah. Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good. Can you hear me right?
Hello. Yeah, we can hear you fine. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. Yeah. As John just said, there's 18 overall recommendations, 4 which are priority 1, which is the 4 that we've been focusing on in the past few months. We have been have had helps with some extra health and safety recommendations from a member of staff, which has been great. So those particular recommendations, such as the specialist training required by the grounds maintenance staff, some of the job descriptions, some of the health and safety issues at Unit C, we've managed to achieve, but unfortunately, not all of the actions that we thought we would meet by the 31st of December, we have been able to meet. I think some of those targets were a little bit optimistic, plus we were hoping to get some additional resource to help deliver some of those actions. Unfortunately, that hasn't materialised, so some of those have slipped. And in all honesty, the other recommendations that were due to be met for the 31st of March, I'm envisaging that some of those will slip as well, in all honesty. But we are focusing on the higher priority health and safety issues, and those ones we have met. So yeah, that's my summary. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. So hand it over if there's any questions at this point or on any of the other audits in the report.
Yeah, should we take any questions around the GM audit first and then cover the others as well? So if we do the GM questions first, so Councillor Warnes, did you have a question?
I mean, when I looked at the report, obviously grounds maintenance is newly back from Capita, so I would probably have expected some issues. And I think the audit shows that the internal Capita issues processes were rather poor, but that's probably not a shock to anybody. When we're looking at workflow and resource planning, hopefully we'll take account of the fact that the time of year for the grounds maintenance team is terribly significant, and there is one particular time of year where they're going to be very, very busy. And I noticed the stuff about tree monitoring and that kind of stuff, and hopefully whatever we come to with that will take account of the sort of species and age of tree, so the probability that something might happen, and the location of the tree as to what's the likely risk in terms of the location, so that we factor in some sensible parameters as to what frequency of visitation we need for those. But yeah, I just thought there's a lot of recommendations there, but everything seemed quite sensible and things that by and by we should hopefully be on top of and have proper training and everything else.
Yeah.
Processes.
I just wanted to clarify that it came back from Sodexo, not Capita.
Sorry, Sodexo. I think
yeah,
it's okay.
That's all right.
Whoops.
Yeah, Councillor Carr.
Yeah, there was a couple of recommendations that said that they may slip. How are we going to make sure they don't slip too far?
Yeah, so I think that's just a question for the committee and the members as to how they want to sort of approach that. Our internal process is to get an update every quarter, work closely with action owners just to see where they are with the actions and see what a realistic time frame would be. Obviously, each time we do that, we see if the risk is still there and the action is still appropriate. We don't want to be chasing an action which is no longer relevant. And then it's a case of the committee kind of deciding how they want to do that follow-up. Really, there's it depends on an individual basis, I think, what the root cause of the delay is as well. So
can I just ask John Backley a question, which was just, you mentioned about the reason for some of the delay in getting not being so far forward as you would like on some of the actions was to do with the resources. Is that, could you just say a bit more about that? Is that there is resource planned and it's not in place yet, or yeah, just thinking about timeframes, and do you feel like in the next few months you will have the resource to?
I hope so, Chair. The initial idea was to recruit internally. We thought that there may be some particular member of staff that would help in particular to deliver these actions. That didn't materialise, unfortunately, so we're having to recruit externally, and because this is a post that we haven't recruited to before, we've got to do a job description, and just the recruitment process takes a while. So that's kind of the cause of the delay. We need the extra resource when you look at the number of recommendations and a number of processes and procedures that have not been in place. It's just going to take a bit of person power to do that.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful in terms of just thinking about the timeframes that we might need to look again
Yeah.
at this, because I guess we wouldn't want to bring it back too soon, because there is quite a lot to do and it will take a few months to get
Yeah.
the recruitment process through as well. So
That's right. And in terms of this audit, this was, we always sort of suspected we would have quite a lot of recommendations, quite a lot of findings. It covers a large area, 3 teams, and it's something we haven't really looked at in a long time, and obviously it coming back in-house. So it might be a case of breaking it down and seeing where we can kind of review things in a bit more granular basis going forward, and see what other support we can provide to John and his team.
Well, I would suggest that you probably use this year just as a test bed for key learnings to implement for next year, next time.
okay, Councillor Roberts and Councillor Skinner, did you want to come in as well? No, okay, Councillor Roberts, please.
Yes, I mean, I was a bit worried about things like they've not following CHOSO, they'd reverted to tick sheets, and some of the play equipment and visits and checking for the safety there. You say that we've updated and covered all the health and safety risks, but there's also things like the driving licenses weren't always available. So when you say health and safety, I'm not quite sure whether that incorporate, because that's sort of operational. Play equipment is also operational, but driving licenses is much more to do with the practical side and filling in the tick sheets. As soon as you go to tick sheets, it means you then got to put it all back into concerto eventually to catch up. So those are the areas I was a bit worried about. You know, how far behind are we in getting grips with the IT, and have we got things like the driving license and things in place and the play equipment, because those I think are the biggest reputational risks that we're doing. We can kind of catch up on them, and hopefully not trees. I mean, yeah, it depends on where the tree is and where it falls, but you know, those are the risks that I think that would really get us into serious reputational problems.
So in terms of the committee looking again at this, have you got an idea, Victoria, like would 6 months time be a reasonable time, or do you think, I suppose you don't want to keep bringing it back, so if there's just small changes, but you know, so what a reasonable time frame would be to?
Yeah, possibly 6 months if I work with John, and I guess it's dependent on the recruitment process really, and how and once that gets started, and then at that point we could possibly revisit John and myself, and to see what the plan is for the new officer and for John at that point. Obviously, from what John was saying, I don't think it's clear when the recruitment will be crystallised.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Skinner.
Very mundane question. I heard the number 10 at the beginning of the discussion, and I can't make a number 10 out of any combination of these. I just wondered what I was missing. It might be.
I think, sorry if I may, there were 10 priority 2 actions raised. So if you look at the priority 2 table on the front page of Appendix 3, and just add those values up, it was 10 priority 2s across the 3 service teams.
Okay, well, my problem with that was that I took all. What is all of them?
All is in respect that it covers all 3 service teams, so the action or a finding related to all 3 areas of the team. And then you have specific to grounds maintenance, specific to the parks area, and specific to trees.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Rowley.
Just one quick question to John. Are you reasonably happy, John, from a risk assessment and training point of view, that there's no major risk to our staff in what we're doing?
Is that for John Backley, by the way?
John Backley, sorry. I beg your pardon.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I'm quite happy that we've prioritised the major risks involving use of specialist equipment, such as the hedge trimmers and the ride-on mowers and the chainsaws, the things that you would probably associate with the most dangerous elements of grounds maintenance. We make sure that the certificates and the training is up to date on those things.
Exactly that. Thank you.
Okay. So sorry, Councillor.
I wanted to ask a question, not about this, about the beginning of the paper, about the the overall.
Oh, okay, can I come back to that if that's okay?
Absolutely,
If we
yeah.
handle the grounds
Fine.
maintenance first and then we'll
Yeah.
go back to the rest of the paper if that's okay, thank you. So I suppose it's not set in stone this 6 months, it was kind of a plucked out of the air number really based on, you know, how long it might take to recruit and get some of these things moved forward, but I don't know, it's the best thing to do to sort of like pencil it in on the work programme in about 6 months time and then like review as we get a bit closer based on your.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. And obviously you'll get an update every quarter anyway.
Yeah,
And if you need any update in between then.
That's true,
I can do that, and I'm sure John would be happy to give an informal update. If I ask him nicely.
Like I said, there's a lot in there, lots of different sections and lots to be done, but it sounds like, you know, the audit seems really helpful and that there's you know, lots of good ideas and work in progress. It's just giving you time to actually move it
Exactly,
forward
yeah,
a bit, really.
we appreciate there's a lot in there for John and his team to manage, so yeah, it's just being pragmatic about it, really.
Okay, all right then. Oh, all good.
On the new areas that will hopefully be handed over from Taylor Wimpey in the near future, are those all within the plan as well?
What do you mean, sorry?
So obviously we've got a system that covers the existing areas. What about those areas that aren't in our control right now, but will become in our control
Right, okay.
hopefully very shortly?
What do you mean, having a review of those? When
Yeah.
they come in? Yeah, that's a possibility for us to consider. I'm at the process now where I'm sort of looking at what the plan would look like for next year. If that comes up as something that we need to look at from a risk score, then yeah, we would definitely consider that. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. All right, are we happy to move on to the other elements of the report? So Councillor Skinner, you have, oh, sorry, thank you, John, and John, for your input onto there. Thank you. Councillor Skinner, did you want to say something about the overall?
Yes, it was back at the list of outstanding actions. Really based on the fact that I mean, it's really good that we're reviewing these outstanding actions because that didn't always happen. However, I think it's really important to see the performance by service area, because that gives an idea of where the responsibility lies and gives you a very quick view of how seriously these things are taken. And not unrelated to that, the paragraph 14, overall, we received a 93% response rate from action owners. I personally would be much simpler about that. Either if an action is completed, then they should tell you. And if they don't tell you, it's not completed, and it should. Whatever the consequences are, should trickle with that, because it's the responsibility of those people to see that it's done.
Yeah, so on the first point, as I said, I'm happy to take on feedback as what you'd like to see in the report. So having it by service area would be helpful, then I can present the data in that way next time. If you wanted to know for the current situation, I can send that separately. Not a problem, I've got the information. With regards to the 93%, for the 7%, I have just assumed that they're still open. It's just I mention it because we don't have a detailed update, which is probably the most helpful part for members. So the 7%, we don't have the detail of why they're open. That's kind of the what I was getting at with that statistic there.
But I mean, yes. So when you get an update, so do you actually? Let me start again. Really, by allocating things by service area, I think you should get those figures from the service areas, and it should come with a commentary. And the commentary should say we're wonderful. We've closed everything we said.
Cases, it's the 7% I didn't quite get this time. So then what I do is I review the updates, and then I do my own validation checks, and I ask for evidence as to whether things are happening as they update me, basically. So I don't just take it on face value. I do audit it again, essentially.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
No, I think that I won't pursue it. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm
But
in favour of you doing as little admin work as possible. The important thing is to do the audits. If
Yeah.
people have got something that they need to put right, they should take the consequences of that, which include telling you they've done it and proving to you that they've done it. You
Yeah.
shouldn't have to go and drag it out of them.
I take on board your comment, but we used to do it that way and it was less fruitful, let's say. So I'm finding this way is actually more helpful for me, and I'm getting better results by actively going out to action owner. I would love to just sit back and people come to me, but unfortunately I'm obviously not that attractive to come and speak to. So it doesn't quite work. I have to go and chase people.
yeah, but we can. But you do have the information by service area, so that would be
I
relatively
do.
straightforward.
If you would like to see it that way,
see
I
it by
can
service
definitely
area.
do it that way. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Okay. So, Councillor Rawlings.
I mean, I think the other thing that might be useful to draw out is to focus on anything that we think through effectively a single event or something like that we have got massive council-wide systemic risks, whether that might be cyber security or whether that might be business continuity or something like that, that we really are bringing those particular things out and have a reasonable level of confidence that they are going to be as close as to a reasonable standard within a short time span.
Yeah, and I think we did that with the information security, and that's why I do sort of emphasise the higher risk ones or priority ones, as we now refer to them. Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions on some of the other audits. I was just seeing if anyone else wanted to go first, but I can. So I had one that was related to the mobile homes audit, which was generally, really positive and good to see, useful audit. The last point on the mobile homes audit was around getting feedback from service users, and I wasn't clear whether there was an actual action or that's going to be followed up in terms of customer service and kind of checking that residents of the mobile home parks are sort of satisfied with the service they're getting. I didn't know if you.
Yeah, so obviously with the reasonable assurance reports, we're just providing the summary, so you won't have the detail of the evidence that we've raised, but we have raised an action for them to introduce a feedback form, which they've agreed to do.
Oh, brilliant, that's good. And then the other one that I just picked out was around the credit card use.
Yeah.
And particularly in the report, it talks about the housing teams in particular using credit cards quite a lot. And I'm sure that in terms of like urgent housing and there's probably really good reasons why a credit card is probably the best approach. But I just wondered if other methods have been looked at, if that's something that's kind of being kept under review, whether there's another payment system other than credit cards, really.
Yeah, so the housing team do have accounts with hotels such as Premier Inn, and they have credit limits with those hotels. So and that process follows the standard invoicing process. So if those credit limits are reached, that's when the credit cards would be used. How often they're breached, I don't know the information. I'd have to go away and have a look, but that's my understanding of how the housing team operate with this.
So that would kind of minimise the use of the credit card, but obviously the need is going to fluctuate, isn't it? So
exactly. Yeah, it's one of those ones that's a little bit unforeseen, really.
Yeah,
when they would need to use it.
Okay, thank you. Has anyone else got any other questions? Councillor Skinner.
This breaks my micromanagement rule. And I think it tells me here, the credit card bills are settled by the council. Is that correct? Yeah. I seem to remember when I worked for a living that we had a system whereby the credit card bills were settled by the user, which reduced the use quite a lot.
Yeah, that's how it operated when I worked for previous organisations. But the credit cards were in my name. It just worked differently. Here we settle it by the council, don't we? Making sure Sam's nodding.
Okay, right. Anyone else on the audit report? No. Okay, in that case, should we move on to the next one then? Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Victoria. Which is the health and safety audit update. So Andrew Busby, I believe, yes, there is on online for us. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to Andrew to introduce this one as well, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, committee. So yes, this is a briefing with an update on the health and safety audit. This service has recently come in under the DCL service, and we've this is basically an update on where we've recruited successfully to 2 positions, and I'll just walk you through the report. The background is as set out that the previous health and safety audit was in 2017, and then the latest audit, the field work, was conducted in 2022. That assurance rating was limited. There were 18 recommendations made. Both health and safety vacancies are now filled following the resignation of previous advisors during March of last year. And the report updates on the observations and associated recommendations made by the audit team and summarises other activities. On the recruitment update, both health and safety positions have recently been fulfilled through the appointment of Andy Huckstep, who is sat in the room with you, and put your hand up, Andy, thank you, as Senior Health and Safety Advisor, and Louise Doherty as the Health and Safety Advisor through the internal transfer from the Environmental Health Service, both effective from December last year. All services are encouraged to ensure contact is made during Q4, and that's Andy and Louise have made good inroads to making contact with all services to get an understanding of where they are with health and safety and where we can offer advice and support. Summary update is that the recommendation of the health and safety team to review and revise the entire health and safety management system in full agreement with the existing audit recommendations and continue very regular communications with the audit service. As the health and safety team embedded with the councils, a number of topics are currently under review, including but not limited to health and safety training content within the LEA in-house software system, the health and safety training strategy to include training matrix and in-person training delivered by in-house health and safety team, full policy and procedure program review, lone worker and lone alert program review and redeployment, health and safety incident reporting platform, investigation and summary report, including SMT reports. Staff to be engaged to include management training and to relaunch the health and safety champions. And that also includes regular communication with Unison representatives. The overall health and safety programme and redevelopment and redeployment shall be taken in consultation and periodic updates to both this committee and internal audit and risk. The risks within the briefing document have been colour coded as RAG status, red, amber and green, depending on the level of risk, red being the highest score and the highest risk. And that's been shown in each objective areas within the agenda pack. On the recommendations, works are very much continuing and underway with each one of those recommendations, and in fact the driving policy is ready to be presented to SMT for review and update, and Andy and Louise are working like I say in communication with audit through each one of those recommendations according to risk, and obviously starting with the highest risk first. There's a number of health and safety policies with the HR input, obviously through the Capita contract. That now is much improved, so we can have a much more of a dialogue with each of the policies with internal HR, and to be able to do a review on the actual policy itself. Can it be combined? And challenge ourselves on the nature of the policy, and more importantly on procedures. It's one thing having policies, but it's more important that we actually adopt procedures throughout the council, and that's something that Andy and Louise have picked up on. So Appendix 2 is the review schedule. and that's reviewed as set out on there with some target dates. And I'll pause there, Chair, just to take any questions at that point.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So open the floor. Has anybody got any questions? Yeah,
Just
Councillor
a very obvious question to me anyway. Is 2017 for the last audit seems an awfully long time ago. Is there a particular reason why there was such a long pause between the two audits?
I think it was purely just an area of fluctuation, to be honest, and staff changes. So we sort of kept waiting for the right time, and then we just had to draw a line in the sand and go for it. So we went for it, and hence we found quite a lot. It's just an area that's always been, well, since I've joined the councils, changed in terms of staff members and things that are going on, really, to be honest. Yeah, in hindsight, probably should have looked at it earlier.
No, I do understand that actually, but I mean, funny enough, I can understand the difficulties of mounting an audit when there's flux, but flux often equals risk.
Yes.
And therefore, it seems to me that that should be an indicator that perhaps a more frequent audit might be required.
Yeah. No, yeah, just Simon's in my ear. no, and yes, you're absolutely right. And actually, what I would really like to do with health and safety now, Andy and Louisa in post, is to kind of work together to come up with a regular audit programme for health and safety that scores always very highly on our risk profile, and perhaps look at it every year, but not look at it in its totality, but to break it down into manageable chunks for each of us, because what we're left with is a lot of recommendations and a lot to do. So we want to be helpful in the way that we audit, but it is a higher risk area. Yes, we probably should have looked at it sooner than when we did. And we just want to kind of get a programme going forward that's manageable for each of us, really.
No, that seems eminently sensible.
Yeah.
I'm just not worried, asking the question sitting here, whether there are other areas which have also been in a state of flux and where therefore the audits haven't been as frequent as they might have been.
So what we're doing now is, when I put the audit plan together, I'm checking against the corporate risk registers and making sure that you've got a picture of what scores highly on our corporate risk registers and how does that map to the audit plan, so that you can easily see if there's any gaps. So another example would be the information security, that always scores quite highly on the corporate risk register, hence why we did a review there, and we've got a plan for that sort of going forward. So I'd like to think that when I present you the report in March, if there is a gap, at that point you can say, look, there's a gap, Victoria, you can thought about that. The other thing that we'd ideally like to have in place is an assurance map, because that would also help with identifying what the risk profile is of the organisation, and where do we get our assurance from? Is that from audit? Is that from our second line, our first line? And where are the gaps, and are we happy with those gaps? So there's a bit of work to do on that area, but at the moment we're doing what we can with the corporate risk register and mapping that at least to our audit plan.
I like the corporate risk register. I always so look forward to that.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Victoria.
Okay, Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, noting on the recommendations there in order of importance, I think one of the highest ones there is driving at work, and that I think the last time that was looked at was 2017. I do note, working for a company where we've got lots of people employed driving, actually it's recently identified fatigue is probably the biggest factor in accidents. And I think peak accident time is 0600 in the morning. Actually, is that being factored into the new to that review?
I'd have to, on the specifics of that, defer to the two Andrews.
And you're welcome to join us at the table if you if you would like to.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't know which Andrew or Andy would like to comment on that.
I'll start, Chair, if that's okay. So yeah, the working at or driving at work policy, it has certainly been drafted, and that's due to come to SMT very shortly. But we've taken into account what the councillors flagged there regarding timing of working. I don't know if you wish to add anything to that, Andy.
I believe there's mention in there, but I can't recite it verbatim.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, sorry, I work for Network Rail. We have several thousand people who
Yes,
drive a vehicle every day, and actually that's been a massive focus internally in our organisation at the moment about driving, and actually sort of making certain that when people are fatigued, actually they take appropriate measures to
Absolutely.
make certain they don't drive if they are too fatigued.
Councillor Roberts?
Yes, my slight concern is that this is largely based about getting policies in place and making sure that they're available and there's training for them. But there isn't any data to say how that affects how many sicknesses we have at work, how many accidents we've had. So yes, I'd love to see all the boxes ticked, but I'm not sure that we've got any assessment of how successful the overall health, because I would have thought the purpose of health and safety and the policies is to keep people healthy and safe. And without any health and safe data, I'm finding it a little difficult to assess whether this is good or bad or indifferent. So I know that that's a difficult area, but there is sickness and the amount of sickness, and that's always a good indicator of mental health policies and all the others as to how your organisation's faring, and accidents at work and things like that, and situations where you've got somebody driving who we didn't check on the driving licence and they had an accident or they injured somebody, that kind of thing. I just think about that. I know I'd hate to use the word KPIs because I hardly think you can say, oh, we've managed to kill 3 people this year. It wouldn't be a good look. But an assessment of how well the policies actually improve the situation at work.
That's something I should go to Andrew and Andy, or did you have any comments on?
I think on the
that
use of data, yes, because I'm not sure what the latest is, but in terms of incorporating that into our audit, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so in terms of, Andy or Andrew, did you want to comment on that?
From my perspective, we've got a lot of opportunity where we are and where we need to be with health and safety. And certainly one of them is looking at the lost time incidents, the occurrence, the duration, and mapping that back. If we had historical data and we're a little bit lacking in that, then we would be able to see a progressive improvement. But I think we will naturally know that there's a progressive improvement because we're putting better systems in place. But certainly over the course of a rolling year, in second year, third year, we should be able to identify peaks and troughs of improvement areas that are required. It's very much part of the health and safety management system. Yeah.
So you're saying that at the moment, the sort of the baseline data, if you like, is a bit lacking.
It's a bit lacking.
But there are plans in place to gather more data and
get us up to the standard that I think we need to be in, and as has been identified by the audits historically.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions?
Just coming back to the point about the data's lacking. When will you feel comfortable? Like, I've got the data and I know that actually we're in a brilliant place, good place, not very good place. When do you think you'll be comfortable?
Data-wise, it's going to take a rolling calendar year from a point of completion, and the completion will never actually finalise itself. Constant improvement. But I think where we are now, honestly, we're a good 18 months away from something that I would consider to be suitable.
Long time.
Unfortunately, it is.
Yeah.
The fact that you said 18 months, obviously I'd like that to be shorter. So how can we, or are you getting the resources? I know you've joined, but is there going to be plans for other resources to make that happen? Because health and safety is quite a key area, and it seems waiting another 18 months for us to be adequate is concerning.
Yeah, Andrew, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, certainly, and I'd agree 18 months is too long. What we'd need to introduce is targeting the highest risks within those policies, and giving regular updates on data, establishing data. If we don't have it, let's gather what information we do have and set that benchmark from a lot sooner than 18 months. I think what Andy means is to reflect upon that benchmark data. Could potentially take 18 months through the whole cycle, but I could quite agree with members that that's too long to get some reassurance on where we're heading. So as a priority, we can start gathering data to better establish that baseline, and that can be updated on a quarterly basis on what what policies we're able to gather.
And can I just ask, sort of following on from your question, Councillor, kind of about resource just generally, do you feel that now that you've got the posts filled, that you're sort of confident that, you know, you've got the resource that you need to deliver against this and put all these actions in place now?
I do, yes. I think we've got some. We've got two. I won't make Andy blush, but we've got two very good candidates who's working for us now, and really boost the team. Obviously, there is a lot of historic information to gather, but I think once we get stuck into it and start working through that list, I think we'll be in a good place. Yeah, if there's a need identified through this process where we do need to bring in a temporary resource, then obviously I can make sure that that's reflected upon within the team and divert resources accordingly.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Skinner, did you like me?
We do presumably do basic accident reporting,
Yes, yes.
but we don't gather that together to.
It's been a little bit sporadic and we capture the essentials. Yeah.
Okay. So any more questions on that one? Okay. Okay, in that case, I think we can move on to the next item. So thank you, Andy, for coming, and Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, committee.
Yeah, you're updates on that one. Okay. So the next item is the Treasury Management Mid-Year Monitoring Report. So it's back to Simon.
Okay, thank you. So this is the mid-year monitoring report for the current financial year 2023-24. This is the time of year I get very confused about which year I'm in. But this is the report about this performance for the current financial year to date. So that's performance against the strategy that was agreed back in February earlier this year. The key information to look at is page 76, and that tells you performance for the year. It will come as no surprise that interest rates went higher and expected to stay longer than we thought they were going to do 12 months ago. The net result of that is that we are earning more money for our investments than we originally budgeted. In terms of compliance with the strategy, we have stayed within all counterparty limits and within all prudential indicators. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, so questions, Councillor Woolley?
A couple of questions, and I think the interest rate that Link are putting forward may turn out to be a bit higher than they're suggesting. I think they will consistently forecast a bit low. On the Q2 side, I think what we're showing here on the income is actually the cum. It doesn't make that very clear. It states it as Q2, but it's actually, I think, the cumulative as at 1 to 2. The property investment stuff there, what is that?
So that's the portfolio of existing properties that the councils own. So it's things like industrial estates. In the case of South, it's the rental income from Orchard Centre, for example.
Yes, okay. Yeah. So the point being just to distinguish that from the part that's within the Treasury, which is
CCLA.
The CCLA. Yes, exactly. And when we look at Appendix A1, so for example, for South there, we come down to a total of 177.2 there. How does that relate back to page 76? Does that relate back? That presumably would relate to the 181.
Yeah.
047. There must be something else that.
So obviously what you've got in page 76 is an average balance for the period.
Yeah, and you say principal, yes.
Yeah, and what you've got at the 31st of September, which is what Appendix A1 is a snapshot in time.
Right. So is that including a bit of income? Is that the difference that's going on there?
No. So the principal varies every day. So and I was quite surprised actually at how much the principal went up and down during the period.
Yeah.
So as I said, one is the average, but that is exactly what we had in the bank on the 30th. On the 30th of September. On the 1st of October, we'd have added 7 million to that, probably at least, because we'd have taken the council tax and business rates income.
Yes, yeah, okay. The first three items on page 80 there are the ones that you're talking about, the older deposits where we got a much lower rate of return on the right-hand side. So we put from Gravesham, we're only getting 0.3% because that's how it was when we put that deposit away.
Yeah.
I mean, those ones are 2.5, 5, 3 years, I think. And the question one of the questions I have in my head is, we often talk for South, we often talk about having 50 million or whatever, and we've got 15 with Sohar, we've got a bit with the unit trust and CCLA, which add up to 19. And I guess we've got the property piece there, and then there's another piece of it that's falling into the deposit, even though we're sort of saying that's pretty long-term money. And to me, that's just one of the questions we need to get to. On the returns that we see on page 82, and I'll look at South first of all, the LNG index, that return that we're showing there, that's everything, is it? And reflects perhaps some fallback in values.
On the unit trust, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. And ditto on the property fund, that presumably there've been some.
I mean, the property perform. It's interesting actually. The property fund has, because obviously the LNG index has actually made a 2% return, 2.31% return.
Yes.
The property fund has made less of a return, but performance against benchmark is higher.
Yes, because others have lost even more.
Yeah.
But hopefully we'll recover at some point. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Porter.
Yes, thank you very much. I suppose I'm asking about sale, but I think the questions are fairly relevant to those. How much of our total income is represented by investment income? So, you know, what proportion of the activities of the councils does it fund?
So, I mean, basically, the council's net revenue budgets are of the order of around between 17 to 20 million pounds.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking, when we set this budget, I think 5 million was the estimated income that South is going to get, and 3 million was the estimated income Vale is going to get. So that probably gives you a feel for the order of magnitude.
So it's pretty important. Really.
It's very important. And I think what we've noticed is, I mean, when I started here 16 years ago, £6 million, and I was just working for South then, so I don't know the equivalent figure for Vale, but you know, South was regularly earning 6 million per annum every year, and that was just standard. And we've had to adapt in the last 10 years to earning 2 million per annum. And so we're in a situation where we are seeing those returns increase, and the council is able to take advantage of them, but they aren't going. Well, we don't think they're going to last forever. That's the challenge.
I was going to say, you were talking about the agreed capital expenditure base. Basically, its amounts are going to decrease, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I suppose what I'm getting at is the risk I'm thinking about here is that as the level of interest income decreases, there might be pressure, not necessarily will you appear, Simon, you might have, you know, moved on or something, to increase the rate of return on the amount of money that we have available, and therefore there'll be a risk of us taking greater risks than we do at the moment. How do we guard against that? How do we monitor that? And sometimes it's not a matter of someone said, I'm going to take some more risk, but it's the pressure of the moment.
I mean, I think we're pretty good with our current team in living within the strategy, and I think our strategies are they're probably not as risk averse as some councils. I mean, there are some councils who I know that their treasury management strategy is to put everything in overnight or put it in the government's DMO facility, which doesn't pay any interest. And I think that's just too risk averse. I think the critical thing for us is that sticking within the parameters we've set. So as we heard from Link earlier on when they did their presentation to us, you know, off the back of the strategy that we will agree, and we'll come on to the strategy obviously in due course, off the back of that strategy, they will prepare for us a counterparty list that complies with that strategy. And they will keep that updated in the year. So we will only ever lend to anybody on that list as that's updated from time to time. I think within that, what you find is that I mean, I don't even think it's that different now. There's not an awful lot of fluctuation between what you can get, but the fact of the matter is that, you know, and I've been in this situation in recent months, you know, an organisation rated triple B is offering a better rate than an organisation that's rated double A. Well,
Of course.
well, we'll still take the double A rated one. That's what we're here to do. And it'd be wrong if we didn't really following the principles of that. So I think properly trained officers working with their advisors, I think will work within those limits. I think it's making sure that the staff are appropriately trained, the members are aware, and this is a critical one, I guess, is that members are aware that, you know, making as much money as possible out of treasury isn't the primary function here. The primary function here is maintaining, you know, not losing that money and making sure it's safe. And I think that's where, like, tonight's session on training comes in, making sure members understand their responsibilities, making sure officers understand their responsibilities. So I don't know whether that answers your question, but it's how I think it works.
I think it's great, but actually it leads on to my question that I was going to ask under the strategy bit, but it leads so nicely on at the moment. I'm going ahead because the one thing of 40 years of working in banking and bank related activities was that I learned very rapidly that the policies can say one thing, but actually it's all dependent on the quality of the people who are actually operating those policies.
Mm.
Now, I'm sure we have first-class staff, and I'm properly trained. I'm sure Link is a fantastic organisation, but I'm not quite sure how we are able to monitor that at the moment using the systems that we have. And I'm wondering whether in the reports there ought to be some analysis or, yes, of the skill sets that our people have got, of certainty as to training. And also, I'm going to be told now that Link came up for approval by this committee and we all approved it at some stage. But yeah, but I don't know. Well, I do know them actually, but I don't know them in my capacity as a councillor.
Mm.
And I think that we ought to be looking at those to approve them because obviously they play a very important role in the treasury management activities of both councils.
Yeah. So a couple of points on that. I mean, some of the points you've raised will be picked up in the annual treasury management audit that Victoria's team would do. And in fact, I whispered to her at the point at which Janine was talking about qualifications, just to double check. That's in scope, and that's the qualifications of our staff. The point about Link's an interesting one. I mean, in terms of our procurement rules and constitution, the value of the contract is such that it's within officers' gift, it's within my gift to award that contract. We could make an exception for that if that's the case. I mean, in reality, there are only two players really in the market for local authority investments, so it's not a big playing field, but it's certainly something we can take away and think about.
Yes, perhaps approved was it might have been too strong a word, but I think it'll be very helpful for us to know something about them, you know, sort of in those terms. I've just got one more thing to go. Is that all right, Chair? I know
That's fine.
I'm obviously getting more confident now as I'm, a few months under my belt. We were talking as well about both councils having income from rents and other things. And again, how are we able to know or to analyse whether some of these assets might be impaired and what the certainty of that income is going forward? I haven't actually seen an analysis of that in the reports, but that may be because I was reading them too quickly. I don't know. So.
Okay, so I'm going to answer part of it, and then I'm going to take advantage of the fact that Andrew is still on the call. I'm hoping he hasn't just left his computer and run off. But but certainly in terms of the first part, clearly we get annual valuations of our property, or not necessarily annual. Actually, with investment property, it is annual. It's a requirement to be annual under the code for financial accounts anyway. So that will give us a view as to whether that's been approved. And the other thing we did obviously 2 or 3 years ago, strategic property review, which is why I'm quite pleased Andrew's on the call still, because I think we did that strategic property, which was looking at in exactly those questions. What assets do we hold? Why do we hold them? Should we still hold them? And although that was one piece of work, I think it's probably become the work of the strategic property team. I don't know, Andrew, whether you want to come in on that.
I will do, Simon. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, spot on that the strategic property review did just start to review what development opportunities we have across the estate. The work which will continue next would be to look at what assets that the councils have, which could potentially be supported by town and parishes. So that would be certainly a scope of work that we wish to introduce the next financial year, and we'll actually be recruiting 2 additional surveyors to do that process. What will follow from that is once we have the new corporate plan, that will then introduce an asset management plan where we look at all the assets linked to the strategic property review, and then that will filter down to the business plans for each service area, mainly strategic property. But yeah, there's certainly plans afoot for addressing all those items that you just mentioned.
That's brilliant, Chair. May I say thank you very much, Andrew. And just to finish off, then, is there a methodology by which this information comes to a committee, this committee at present? How is that disseminated? How are we able to judge how well we're doing and whether there are really?
That's a very good question. I mean, certainly when the strategic property review was done, the results of that were fed back to committee. I can't remember which one it was fed back to, but that rolling programme, Andrew, is something we probably just need to go away and think through how we report that in future. Again, probably ties into your asset management plan, presentation, that and ongoing reporting on that. It's probably one for us to take away and ponder.
Yeah, thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Simon. I have run out.
I'll give to Councillor Roberts then.
Yeah, because my question was actually very similar to that, and on the back of what we've just heard, I'm wondering how we assess in terms of the property portfolio, property like the Beacon and Cornerstone, and all the other community facilities that we own all around the area, and also the money we receive from the government to go forward with the asylum housing, and how we're going to assess that in terms of property management, because that doesn't seem to me either of those fit very neatly into investment as a. Do you see what I mean? Neither of those purchases are things that we would have done for investment purposes. So, but yeah, where is it going to come in the financial reporting of it? Because they may well be fairly negative and they have to have a place.
So I suppose for the purposes of this report, the answer is very simple. They don't actually fit into here, because this is obviously treasury management. So we are talking in this report about those properties. When we talk about property here, we talk about properties primarily held for profit, which you'd have picked up from the presentation earlier. That historic assets that we own, we can't actually go and buy them anymore under government guidance. So the assets you're talking about there'd have to be an alternative vehicle for monitoring those. I think that again probably takes you back to the asset management plan for those, in terms of a review of why we're holding them, what value does it have, is it right for us to hold them? That will come out of the work from the strategic property team's area.
Will that come to AG or will that go into scrutiny?
I don't really, if I'm honest, it probably feels more scrutiny than Joint Audit and Governance Committee. But again, we can take that away and consider it. It feels more in the scrutiny in terms of reference than Joint Audit.
Unless there's an audit of it.
Unless there's an audit of it, in which case it would come here. Yeah.
2021, I think.
I suppose what we're missing in some sense in the way in our total governance, well, I think missing quite a few things actually, but I think the thing that we're really missing is a sort of finance committee. Someone that's actually responsible for overlooking the overall finances, because immediately we say, oh, we've got some assets which may provide a financial risk and they're going to one committee, and we have another type of asset because they're being used for something else that's going to another committee. It seems to me that there's no, overview of what's happening really. And I think that sounds to me that's deficient, because if you look at something looking at one committee and some, but it's all part of the overall picture. I don't know, and that somehow seems wrong to me.
I think that's definitely one to take away and ponder. I mean, I came from an organisation before that had effectively a scrutiny committee for finance matters. So that this would probably have gone before then, probably as well as the audit committee, because I think it's required it goes through audit committee. But things like the capital strategy, budget monitoring will go before them that don't come here because they have another governance route. So it's an interesting point to ponder. I mean, certainly in the time I've been here, there's been no equivalent of that committee at either council. That doesn't mean that's right. And it's certainly perhaps one for the Constitution Review Group to ponder.
I guess I'd share half.
Well, I think that's a particular area where we may well be increasing our partaking in it, sort of, and therefore I would suggest we're increasing our risk because it's not necessarily an area for profit, and therefore if we're increasing our deficit, it's something that we should be aware of and have limits on and how we approach it.
Do we know which cabinet member it falls under?
I think it might be that one.
Is he allowed to speak to the on this committee?
I think he's invited.
Yeah, I can invite the cabinet member of finance to speak.
It is you then. Yeah.
I guess you obviously have to remember that scrutiny committee do look at the annual budget, and will do very soon. They do look at the upturn reports, which is 3 times a year. So they do have a chance to vet the budget, the annual budget, which includes the medium-term financial plan out for 5 years, and then 3 times a year they get to look at the actuals against that budget. So there is an element of independent scrutiny, and rightly so. Whether that's a governance issue, I guess, is a different issue. It's been not an audit issue. Whether it's a governance issue, I think it's a moot point. But it is important that somebody should do it. And it's certainly also the case that in the past, and the scrutiny committee has chosen to do deep dives in particular areas. So if you go back a couple of years, 2 or 3 years running, I think they did a scrutiny review of the finances of the beacon, for example, and they can choose. They set their own agenda, and they can choose to do that on any number of financial areas.
Well, I mean, this may not be the place. Perhaps we can have a word offline. But I mean, it just seems to me that we've got a holistic thing being looked at quite separately. I mean, if you were a bank, you would have an impairment committee somewhere, which is actually looking at the quality of the assets, the quality of the operations, and working out where the risks were, or a risk and impairment committee or something like that. And we sort of do it, but I don't think we seem to do it at the moment in a very linked up sort of way.
Yeah, your impairment committee were looking at the assets of the bank. We're talking about the assets of the Vale. That they are, and probably almost equally true in South. Our investment assets are actually quite small in number. They are an interest in Berry Street. There's the charter. There's the hotel, whose name shall not be mentioned, and various other relatively small holdings. There's a commercial unit, I think, isn't there, near Delicious Centre in Abingdon. So there's a relatively small number of holdings which do get valued every year as part of the external audit process. So that ought to satisfy your concerns about impairment.
Oh, well, no, that's but essentially I hadn't realised that there was one. I suppose one of the questions I was trying to get at is how big are they? And actually, what you're telling me is that they're not actually.
I might have missed some other ones, but that is
big in the big picture.
The majority of the time. Are there any other big investment assets? The assets that
I mean, I think South has probably got more, but I think for Vale, you've probably covered it.
Yeah.
But I guess the point you're making, and it's for us to reflect on, is their performance almost comes through Joint Audit and Governance Committee. When you see the accounts, you're not actually getting a separate view, or how has our property portfolio performed in 23-24 isn't a separate report in the way that, say, Treasury Management is, or financial outturn is. It's it's kind of hidden in plain sight in the statement of accounts. If you know what you're looking for, which is clearly the investment property line on the balance sheet.
So just sort of, because we'll need to bring it back to the Treasury Management report that we need to home in on. And I know that some of the queries that we've already started talking about relates to next paper as well. In terms of this kind of governance question, is that something that we can sort of recommend to somewhere? Is looked at when we're looking at the constitution review?
I think so.
Is that something that, do we need to do that as a formal thing or as a committee to ask that be looked at, or
it wouldn't do any harm?
process?
It wouldn't do any harm to put it in, get it minuted.
Yeah.
As a recommendation for review.
And I'm sure that the Constitution Review Group would very much welcome your thoughts on that, Simon, as well.
Yeah, just to sort of check that, is it all being covered? Is anything falling through the cracks, or is there a need for an additional committee, or is it more, I don't know, just looking at how it's all,
I mean, because we're only,
if it's all
I suppose we're only talking about it today by chance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So Darius, is it enough to put something just in the minutes, or should we have like a formal recommendation that we asked?
If it's a formal recommendation from this committee, I would suggest we put it in a different resolution there as well.
Yeah.
I would say, as the cabinet member has said, we do in scrutiny get a lot of reports. So there is some crossover. It's just identifying that particular part. So I personally feel that it is covered. It may not be as blatant and clear as you want it, but I do feel because I sit on both committees, we do see a lot of the reports and we do see the budgets and we can question. And it is available for each of the committees to say, can I deep dive in that particular part? So I personally believe we've got the governance and the authority and the power to cover that. But if we think we should have a further discussion, then I'm supportive of that. But I personally feel at the moment, from based on my experience, it's covered. But there's no harm in actually going a bit further and saying, do we need something separate?
I think from my perspective, I mean, the action I'd want to do off the back of this is to go and check in with a few other councils and see what they do.
Yeah.
Because I think all the pieces, most if not all the pieces are there, but they're not necessarily joined up. I'm trying not to sound like Morecambe and Wise at this point, but I think they're all there. But even if we find a way of joining them up so the same reports come in a more holistic way. We haven't necessarily done anything revolutionary, but we've probably made it more transparent where everything's going. I think that might be enough to satisfy.
Yeah. So should we? Sorry, Darius.
If I may, so we do have an item coming in September, which is a review of the terms of reference. So if I minute now that the head of finance will go away and look at these issues, that might inform our discussion at a later date. That's okay.
Yeah. That sounds good.
But I would like to raise the fact that there are lots of these very small community centres that we don't really have much to do. They're often run by within the community until the community team that are running them get too old, get ill, die, and then we suddenly take over a building that is in a terrible state and needs to have an awful lot of fairly crisis management done to it, and that doesn't really, it is in scrutiny, but it's those sort of buildings are very, very minor and they don't really come up for discussion unless you know they're there. Most people wouldn't really know.
Okay, that's calm.
Just to give you an example of that, maybe it's a declaration of interest, but that example you give, Councillor Roberts, I run a small community centre, but what I can say is the council do scrutinise. They do come and visit. They do come and see.
They don't at mine.
well, I wish they did it on ours, but they do. So I can using that example, I can say they do come and visit, and I'm in liaison with the relevant team member, and they come round, have a site visit, making sure we've got all the paperwork, making sure we're doing all the process in place, insurance, etc., and making sure that we've got the right approval. So it does happen. And it's happening.
I think Councillor Crawford wanted to comment, and then I'll come to Councillor Rawling.
So again, this isn't part of our investment portfolio or our treasury portfolio, but you raise a valid point. This is another service, of course, that was outsourced for some years, wasn't it? And it was brought back in, and it'd probably be fair to say it wasn't in the best state. So an awful lot of work catch up had to be done. Part of Andrew's team, who might still be online, have for quite some time now been charged with going around and doing condition survey on all of our buildings. I know there are scores of little buildings here and there that aren't investments, but they're ones that were used mostly for operational, often with next to no income tax protocol. If the Vale owns the one that you're talking about, Julie, and it has a condition survey hasn't been done, and we haven't assessed it, then if you let me know, this probably comes under my hat as well. I can certainly press that.
I mean, we are paying all the things and we are ticking all the boxes. And they come round when we've got grants from you, they come round. So it's not that they haven't ever come round, but I can think of others, and I know you know of one or two that are teetering on the brink of their residents' community association getting very weak. And even ours, which is only 7-8 years old, we've finished that first cycle of first blood. And then we're back to having a smaller team of the regulars who always turn up.
So yeah, I think we should move on the conversation, but I know Councillor Rawns wanted to come in.
I was just going to pick up, Councillor Fordham earlier was asking a question about security. We can look on page 77 and see, for the sake of, as regards South, in this year, the forecast is that our return will be 2.8 million greater than budget. Whoopee, great result, right? On the other hand, you could say, well, when it comes to impairment, we have a lot of very safe, protective investment of our nominal value. But if we had 50 million that was like longer term holdings, and the inflation was 5% greater than our return, which it probably is, we're down 2.5 million. So great result. We had 2.8 million gain, but we've got a hidden loss of 2.5 million. And that's it's pointing to the questions and challenges that we've got, isn't it? That generally speaking, as yield grows, risk grows. So we have to balance that. We could have something like an equity portfolio, which is probably fairly safe and diversified. But obviously, there's always the risk of a Wall Street crash type thing, where there is a risk. But it's interesting, isn't it, when we talk about things like Sly, because for some, one of the investments we have is the Orchard Centre, and we can think about Cherwell and their problems. We've got a single point of gamble. How secure is it? Not sure. In the context of the internet marching on, how liquid is it? Well, not all that. How great a yield does it give? Well, on its rentals, not too bad at the moment, but in its capital value, question mark. There's something to think about there in terms of our whole strategy that we're going to go on to talk about. But it just illustrates the challenges that we've got in thinking through this minefield.
Well, just to reinforce, I mean, you're right, 2.1 million for Vale of Whitehorse, and well done for getting that additional money. But if you're 2.1 million above budget, you can be 2.1 million below budget as well. And that's a major risk. And the other thing is actually getting hooked on this as well. And one of the things that when I was reading the report about Thurrock is they started getting money from their investments to start off with before they went sour. And instead of, using them for, modernising the council, they just did it to underpin services. So suddenly, you get sucked into sort of this unsafe amount of income coming in. Now, I don't see any sign of that happening around here, I must admit, by just looking at the people involved. But nevertheless, there are these risks, and I think we need to be looking at them very closely, really.
Councillor Skinner, did you want to come in? Sorry.
No, I think what I'd like to do is talk to Councillor Crawford afterwards.
Okay.
And it was about community centres.
Okay. Sounds like, yeah, a good one to take outside the meeting, but yeah. So with this, has anyone got any other questions on the reports, the midterm report? Okay, so what we need to do is because there are two separate reports, one for South and one for Vale, we need to vote on the recommendations separately. But also I didn't want to lose that idea of the Constitution Review Group just looking at, like you say, Councillor Khan, it might be that actually everything's covered. But just to kind of consider it and to ensure that, you know, that nothing's falling between the gaps, really, isn't it, between JAG and scrutiny. So is it better to have a separate recommendation for that from this committee to the JAG, do that first?
Because we're doing two separate recommendations, and part of that is to recommend to cabinet, obviously, anything we've said.
Yeah.
I've also put in each of those recommendations just that the Joint Constitution Task Review Group, as I think it's called, examines this on the next agenda or whenever convenient, I would suggest, as part of the recommendations.
Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that means we've got kind of 3 recommendations on for each council to consider. So should we do South first?
Yeah.
So I don't know, should I ask if there's somebody who'd like to propose that we that the South members support the recommendations on page 73 of the back? Councillor Carr.
I propose that we support the recommendation as stated in the agenda papers on page 73, with the addition of recommendation number 3, which is to put our recommendation towards the Constitutional Review Panel.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder?
Oh.
Or
No, I'm going to get a debate on it there.
okay, all right then. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Morgan. Okay, is there a debate?
I'm basically happy with it. I'm just going to ask that we have inflation reported in here, because the point I was making, I think the relationship between return and inflation is something that we should report and recognise. That was all.
Okay. So do we need to include that in the formal recommendations, or just to sort of something to note?
I think what Councillor Rowling has just mentioned, I think that's just a overall comment that
Yeah,
should be included for Simon, you know, to consider and include go forwards
for future reports. That's the point I'm making.
Brilliant. Okay, so in terms of the recommendations that Councillor Khan has proposed, are all South members happy to support all parts, 3 parts of that? Fantastic. Thank you very much. And then on to Vale, Councillor Border.
Yes, I'll recommend exactly what Councillor Khan did, only with a change of name and probably a change of page as well. It must say it's very helpful having you here, so we really don't need to worry too much about drafting up the recommendations.
As long as we go to the South councillors first, then yeah, we've got the easy job and Vale. But yeah, no, I'm happy to second that proposal. Is everybody happy to support? Yeah.
Thank you.
Okey-doke, brilliant. Okay, so now we'll move on to the strategy. And I know we've started talking about some of the things in here, but who would like, well, would you like to say anything first, Simon, before we ask you questions?
I'll be brief. I mean, the first thing to do is to apologise for the delay in this paper being circulated. So please accept my apologies for that. This is the annual Treasury Management and Investment Strategy for 24-25. So it will be the first report you'll receive in respect of Treasury for the forthcoming financial year. There is only one substantive change to the strategy, which is the introduction of an ESG statement. That's referred to paragraph 9. It's paragraph 9 in both the South and the Vale report, and the full statement has been added to Treasury Management Practice 1, which is Appendix E in both reports, which is in line with the recommended practice for this. Not necessarily not a recommended change to the strategy, but just to advise what we intend to do, and it was referred to earlier on. We have a situation at the moment where interest rates are high, but we expect them to fall. And as we identify in paragraph 13, we are looking to do a review of our current and potential future long-term holdings based on an understanding of the council's cash flow needs over that period. And we have already started talking to Link, our Treasury advisors, about that piece of work. Happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. Has anyone got any questions? Comments?
I've got a number, if I may.
Okay.
It would be helpful, I think, to bring forward together our Treasury stuff and our sort of wider investment stuff, so that we try and bring it together, because otherwise people get a little bit confused sometimes. And I think it's right to have a holistic view of it. We mentioned the point about reporting on inflation and so forth. It would be helpful to look at, and I think that's part of the work, Simon, to look at the structure of things, and it would be very helpful to pick out elements within it, whether it's CIL or SWOT 6 or whatever, components that we could actually have an intelligent look at, because we sometimes think, well, how long have we got that piece of S106 money? Well, only for a year or so. But actually, there's another one coming in, and that one's going out, and that balance, it's viewing that balance and projecting that balance, which is what we're trying to get to, and then make a sensible view about how we can put our investments out there in the right term and in the right for the best return that we can get without being silly about it. Obviously, we've got the issues on the debt stuff of the high interest rates that we've got now, and the prospect of locking in for a long number of years might be a challenge for us. So that's something that we're going to have to manage. And we've all seen that there's lots of imponderables, geopolitical risks out there that have changed where we've been recently, but hopefully they might fade away in due course and put us in a better place. In terms of page, for South 50, page 54, in that analysis, I'm particularly interested in looking at that 78 million that we've got, 6 months to 1 year and 1 year plus, and doing that kind of stuff, because again, I think that's kind of just in telling us how long we've got it out there for, but we need to understand the underlying funds to understand how long in reality we're likely to keep them for. And it seems to me sometimes our balances last longer than we sometimes think they do. So that's a necessary piece of understanding what our opportunities are going forwards. For South, well, for both of us, there's the issue of Gateway at some point, which relates back to that interest thing, but perhaps that's a bit beyond. The debt part of it isn't beyond Treasury strategy. But I definitely want to begin to move towards ESG, and I think, Simon, you're saying that, and what we heard from Link, we're in a position of looking more at that and seeing how we can understand it and how we can make sure that we navigate that in terms of compliance with CIPFA and other guidance that we must live with. So that's reasonable. Sorry, I've said quite a bit. I'll pause for a moment there. Everyone else will go.
Anyone else have any questions about the strategy? No. Wow. So yeah, I was going to say that I really welcome the inclusion of the ESG, and I got quite excited when I saw it on there. And then once I started to kind of read a bit more and learn a bit more about what that actually means in practice and what we can actually do, it's kind of quite limiting, isn't it? But do you think that the way that the strategy is written kind of is kind of general enough so that we can, I suppose, finesse our approach to ESG as we get, more reliable scoring systems and more information about how that can be applied and that kind of thing?
I think that's where we want to go. Yeah. I think at the moment, I think first of all, you've got to distinguish between, if you like, the more short-term deposits and the more long-term funds. And I think the funds are probably an area where, the security bit is probably quite, and I think it's, when we had the training earlier on, I think there were questions around, the longer term security is probably more impacted by some of the ESG stuff and some of the counterparties you might have in a fund. I think on short term, it's trickier. I think I'd like to get to a stage where if you've got almost sort of two identical opportunities in front of you in terms of security, liquidity and yield, a reliable source of ESG scoring is a basis of determining which one you would go with. I think that's where I definitely would like to get to. But I think at the moment, I think the key word in the ESG statements is, which is in common with lots of others, is it's an overlay to security, liquidity and yield. And I think it was Councillor Porter who said it earlier on. You almost need the code to, stick ESG somewhere in security, liquidity and yield for us to be really able to do it going forward. And I think that it's really tricky to be fair to the regulators and the code writers to do that, particularly given historic things that have happened in the economy, when there's been crashes. And we all know, you know, what happens when there is a crash. You know, it's whose fault was it? Who did it? Why did they do it? And I think that's why,
Yes.
you know,
Icelandic.
it's a result of one of those crashes that security, liquidity, and yield was written down and hammered home to us. Really. So I think what I think it does do is I think it probably reinstates, I think, to people that, you know, I think ESG is an ambition we would have, but it's also got to be married up with that whole, you know, the diversification, you know, make sure we've invested in lots of areas, activities which by definition might almost mitigate against being, you know, sort of ESG friendly potentially. But I think it's finding those opportunities. As I said, ESG scoring, hopefully one day there'll be a recommended matrix we can use. We can look at it with longer term funds. It's definitely an ambition.
And in terms of the timing and the approval for this, so obviously it goes to cabinet and then it goes to council, this strategy, doesn't it? And then this is reviewed every year, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just sort of thinking, I was wondering about some sort of recommendation of coming back to it, but actually it will come back through the committee next year, and perhaps we'll have a bit more clarity on and a bit more, I don't know, information to be able to sort of implement it a little bit more. I think probably, definitely for me anyway, that because of the corporate objectives of the council, I think this is something that we would like to sort of push as far as we can, but obviously, you know, within the legislation and within the obviously wanting to be responsible with our finances, and it's that kind of fine balance, isn't it? But if the strategy seems to me anyway that it's kind of written in a way that's fairly open, and so therefore there's, you know, as things develop, we can kind of look at them and consider them case by case as opportunities come up.
I think for me, the strategy is probably written. The statement is probably written in a way such that when the opportunities arise, we're ready to take them.
Yes.
So probably of itself, the ESG statement wouldn't necessarily change from one year to the other. I think what would change would be, you know, hopefully in 2 or 3 years' time, Link or whoever advisors are, you know, at that time, or myself, or whoever was in my post at that time, will come to you and say, you know, latest guidance is we can use these tools to actually, you know, implement this going forward, and this is where it's made a difference. That's, I think, where it would go. I mean, I'd say a similar thing, perhaps more generally, about the strategy. I mean, we talk about doing a funds review. I mean, I think the strategy itself is flexible enough to allow us probably to deposit in a whole raft of instruments we're not using yet. The challenge for us is about deploying, how we deploy our money within that strategy. You know, it's an opportunity to review what we do and think about doing things differently. So I think the strategy gives you enough latitude to do. It gives us enough latitude to do what we want to do. It's finding the right opportunities.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Gordon.
Like you, Chair, I'm very excited about this ESG opportunity, but again, I think I'm getting very old actually, because I would counsel caution. I think these things, when they come in, you need to look at the regulation, you need to look at our strategy, and I think it takes quite a long time actually to embed this sort of thing. Funny enough, I was thinking again about the Thurrock incident, where the one thing that they were borrowing all this money and investing it, and they actually did quite nice investments in the sense that they invested in renewable electricity companies. And what did they all do? They went bust, you know, and the money was lost. Now, we can't do that anyway, even under government regulation. But I think it just shows that sometimes it's dangerous to rush at things before we really 100% understand what we're all doing.
Definitely. Thank you. Councillor Rawlings?
Some quick points. I think when we were talking to Janine earlier, she was talking about short-term stuff is sub 6 months, and medium stuff is up to a year. And I would agree with her. Those are the sort of two areas that I would think straight deposits, no trouble, and we're mostly interested in protecting the nominals there. And that's pretty much what we're doing. And then she went on to say, well, property portfolio, maybe you got to be looking at least 5 years, and that's with a portfolio and with diversified risk. The interesting thing that I think we need to work around is that gap between 1 year and 5 years, and understanding what we do with those things, and where we go to a unit trust or something like that, or where we have some other of those vehicles and instruments you were talking about, Simon, that give us perhaps a bit more security, nominal security or whatever, traditional S, but also give us a bit more yield. I mean, I would say let's recommend this report and accept it and support the proposals that have been made for development, but but ask please that for next year, we've got something more with ESG, probably split into those 1 year and less deposit type things and the longer things, and an analysis of our underlying funds based on the sources that underpin them, which will enable us to do much better forecasts and be able to show people and explain people where it comes from, whether it's deficits or whether it's capital expenditure, or whether it's just we're not going to be getting so much S106 or something like that. We can see those things feeding in and make a better choice, I think, going forwards for a strategy.
Thank you. In which case, I think we can move forward to recommendations. And in the supplementary pack of papers that we had the Treasury Management Investment Strategies in, the Vale one is actually first.
Oh dear.
So I was thinking I was going to go to camping barn, and then I went, oh, maybe I should do the Vale one first.
Could you whisper across, please?
That's good. Recommendation first, I'll change that for next year.
I would say is this committee notes and approves before recommendations, stating our agenda papers, in particular Appendix A, E, and Table 6.
Okay. So that is the South recommendation. So that's Councillor Khan's proposal. Have I got a seconder from South?
I support those, but I was obviously looking for those other things that I mentioned as well.
Okay, so is that a seconder?
I'll happily second
Yeah,
that. But I'd like to see
Sounds happy
something more.
to accept all of those recommendations. The cabinet, brilliant, okie doke. And then exactly the same set of recommendations to Vale. I would like to propose that we accept. So the Treasury Management Strategy, the Prudential Indicators, the Annual Investment Strategy, and the ESG Policy in Appendix E.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you very much. Vale members, are you happy to support those recommendations? Yeah.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
and if I may, in relation to South, then I would ask that we recommend that for next year we have those objectives I talked about for ESG and for analysis of funds and forecasts.
So if we make a note of that,
with links input and everything else that Simon's planning.
Take note of the next year.
And that's both council.
Yeah, that's both, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So
Thank
we'll
you.
Put that in the next. Brilliant. Okay, so that means we are up to the work programme, which is item 10. So I'll just briefly go to Darius to see if there's anything in particular you want to draw our attention to.
Yeah, thank you. So you may notice that on the next meeting, we have the Code of Corporate Governance and the RIP report that was obviously scheduled for this meeting. Unfortunately, pushed back, although not too far away. And for the 26th of September meeting, we do have 2 items that were recommended in the training, which were the annual joint audit and governance report to council, and also the review of the terms of reference, which I indicated earlier. So they haven't been forgotten. They are firmly in place for the meeting on the 26th of September. Thank you, Jane.
Darius, can we add statement of accounts just off the back of the potential timeline of the accounts for September as well?
I imagine that'll be an extra meeting.
Well, if the 30th of September is the cut-off, then I'm wondering whether we might need that date we've got at the moment to be the accounts and possibly another meeting 2 weeks later, if we're in that situation.
Yeah, okay, so we can.
So is it worth adding it to the work programme in that meeting, and then we can always, if there's too much on the agenda or whatever, or the timings don't quite work out, we can split it later as long as it's captured in there so we don't forget it.
Yeah, that was where I was going. That we've got corporate governance, we've got investigatory powers, we've got corporate risk review, internal audit, update, plan. There's a plus now the accounts. It's getting a bit weighty, isn't it?
Definitely. So if we make a note that needs to be covered that month, and then we can have a look at the agenda and see if we need to have an additional meeting. Perhaps, John, did you want to come in, or were you going to say something similar?
No, so I'm happy with that.
Okay, brilliant. So are there any other questions or comments on the work programme? No. Thank you very much, Darius. In that case, we have